The HOA president lit my boat on fire. Let that sink in. It was a Saturday morning when it happened. I was in my garage rewiring the tail lights on my truck when I smelled something burning. At first, I thought it was just someone grilling ribs until I heard the popping from the marina and saw the smoke curling above the rooftops. My docked fishing boat, a 26-foot blue and white cruiser named County Queen, was engulfed in flames. I sprinted down the hill behind my house, heart hammering, and nearly slipped on the gravel path. By the time I got there, the fire department was already spraying it down, but it was too late. Just charred fiberglass and melted railing left. I stood there, fists clenched, jaw tight. And that's when she strutted up like she owned the world. Her name was Marlene Whitaker, president of the Glenridge Lakes HOA. Short bob haircut, oversized sunglasses, clipboard in hand like always. Her voice carried that signature Karen pitch, passive-aggressive with a hint of fake concern. "Oh, Hayden," she said, like she was talking to a dog that peed on the carpet. "Such a shame. I warned you about non-compliance. Storing watercraft without HOA approval is a violation." I turned to her slowly. "You think I stored a boat on my own dock without permission? You failed to pay your HOA dues for 3 months," she said, flipping a page on her clipboard for dramatic effect. "That makes you non-compliant. Non-compliance leads to enforcement action." "Enforcement action," I repeated. "You lit my boat on fire," she gave a fake little laugh. "Don't be ridiculous. The HOA doesn't burn boats, but we did issue several notices. Maybe you should check your mailbox once in a while." That's when I knew this wasn't just negligence, it was retaliation. "You really think you can get away with this?" I asked, voice low. Marlene tilted her head, smug. "You live in Glenridge Lakes, Mr. Carter. You don't make the rules, we do." She turned on her heel and walked off, heels clacking on the dock like punctuation marks to her arrogance. What Marlene didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Glenridge Lakes sat on land owned by a holding company. And I owned that holding company. I hadn't planned on using it. I bought the county over 20 years ago through a quiet portfolio deal when I was investing in rural infrastructure, way before this area got trendy. The HOA was set up by developers later, leasing the land under a long-term easement. They never bothered to check who held the title because, well, why would they? But now, after they torched my boat and played it off like some HOA policy, they woke up a sleeping bear. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to argue. I was going to dig. And when I was done, every dirty little power trip Marlene and her clipboard crew had been on would be dragged into daylight, and they'd have nowhere to hide. I spent the rest of that Saturday in silence, sitting at my kitchen table, the faint smell of smoke still clinging to my clothes. The fire marshal's report wasn't in yet, but I didn't need it to know what had happened. The flames hadn't started from the electrical system. That boat was less than 4 years old, and I kept it in perfect shape. Plus, the fire had started at the stern, nowhere near the battery. Someone had doused it in accelerant. By Sunday morning, I'd compiled a list of every HOA board member's name, address, and business affiliation. I wasn't interested in confrontation, I was interested in leverage. The kind that made people sweat in meetings and check every word twice before speaking. I started with Alden Morales, the HOA's treasurer. He ran a local accounting firm, small old signage, nothing flashy. I walked in just before noon, right when I knew he'd be finishing his usual lunch burrito from the taqueria across the street. He looked up from his desk, startled. "Mr. Carter, you know why I'm here." His eyes flicked to the side toward a stack of unopened mail. I didn't give him time to stall. "Your name is on the last certified notice that was delivered to my house. The one claiming my dues were delinquent because of a dispute over dock access. That dock was approved in writing 3 years ago, signed by the previous board. I have the document. So unless the HOA is now in the business of retroactively nullifying agreements, you and I have a problem," he swallowed. "I'm just the treasurer. I don't decide enforcement. You signed off on the penalty assessment. That makes you complicit. And if it turns out someone on your board orchestrated arson as a scare tactic, you'll be the first name the prosecutor sees." He leaned back slowly, sweat forming at his temples. "I didn't know about a fire. Marlene didn't tell us anything like that. Then maybe it's time you asked what else she's been hiding." I left his office without another word. By Monday, I had pulled the HOA's annual reports from the county clerk's office. For an organization claiming budget shortfalls, they had no trouble funneling over $40,000 into community safety enhancements. No receipts, no vendor names, just vague line items and a few cashed checks made out to something called Lakeside Operations. I knew that name. It was a shell LLC registered under Marlene's cousin's name, a man who conveniently owned a private security outfit that hadn't been licensed in the state for nearly a decade. I made 3 calls. First, to a friend in the sheriff's department who owed me a favor from when I helped fund their emergency dispatch upgrade last year. Second, to a fire investigator who specialized in arson for insurance schemes. Third, to a civil litigation attorney who had a reputation for making board members wish they'd stayed home that day. By Tuesday morning, a uniformed deputy was walking Marlene out of the HOA office in front of a crowd of stunned residents. "Unlawful property destruction, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, and falsifying financial records," the deputy said aloud as he cuffed her. "You have the right to remain silent." Her face drained, lips parted in disbelief. She looked around like she expected someone to stop it. But no one moved. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. But this wasn't over. Arresting Marlene was only the beginning. The system she built, the intimidation, the bogus violations, the backdoor deals still had roots snaking through the neighborhood. Wednesday morning, I walked into the HOA's emergency board meeting. They didn't want me there. Too bad. "I own the land this community is built on," I said as I stepped to the front, the room falling quiet. Every inch of it was acquired by my company before Glenridge Lakes was even a brochure. "The easement lease your developers signed is conditional, and as of this moment, I'm revoking it," gasps. A few people stood. One of the board members, a man named Greg, tried to interrupt, but I raised a hand. "Sit down." "I'm not finished." I opened a folder and laid the original lease agreement on the table. This community failed to comply with multiple lease terms, most notably misuse of authority, criminal activity committed under the guise of enforcement, and unauthorized destruction of private property. "That voids your lease." Greg stood again, defiant. "You can't just dissolve an HOA. "I'm not dissolving anything. I'm terminating the land use agreement. Without it, the HOA has no legal authority to operate on this property, and as of now, I'm forming a new neighborhood council. Resident run. Transparent, voluntary." Someone clapped near the back, then another. Greg's face paled. "You're bluffing. You're just some bitter, check the county registrar," I said calmly, turning to leave. The paperwork went through at 8:30 this morning. I didn't wait for the fallout. Back home, I finally opened the envelope that had been taped to my door the week before a notice of lien from the HOA for non-payment of dues. I tossed it into the fireplace, then added the clipboard Marlene had dropped on the dock days earlier. By Friday, the news had reached the local paper. HOA president arrested in alleged arson scheme ran above the fold. The reporter called me for a quote. I told him the truth. It stopped being about fees the moment they thought fear could control people. He asked what I planned to do next. "I'm going to rebuild," I said, "not the boat." The neighborhood, and I meant it. Glenridge Lakes was done being ruled by threats and loopholes. The people here deserved better, and now they were going to get it. By Saturday morning, the neighborhood was eerily quiet. The kind of quiet that settles in after a thunderstorm, tears through and leaves everyone peeking out their windows, unsure of what's still standing. The HOA office was locked up, the sign removed. Marlene's name had been scraped off the mailbox, but the scorch marks on the dock where my boat once sat were still there, blackened, crusted reminders of how far things had gone. I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. I started my morning with a visit to the county courthouse. I had an appointment with Assistant District Attorney Lena Groves, a sharp-eyed woman whose reputation for dismantling white-collar networks made her a nightmare for anyone who liked to cook books. She didn't offer me coffee, didn't bother with pleasantries. "You've opened a can of snakes, Mr. Carter," she said, flipping through the folder I'd handed her. "Shell companies misappropriated funds, forged invoices. This isn't just mismanagement, this is racketeering." "I'm aware," I said. "You'll find bank statements on page 6. Most of the checks were deposited into accounts tied to the security firm Marlene's cousin supposedly owns. That company hasn't had a valid business license in over 8 years. She paused, tapping a pen against her notepad. "And these signatures on the vendor contracts," copied from old HOA meeting minutes. I cross-referenced the timestamps. "The board never voted on those expenditures." She nodded slowly, then leaned back. "We'll need to subpoena those financial institutions for full records. If your documentation holds, we're looking at felony-level charges for everyone with a signature on those checks." "Good," I said, "because there's more." I pulled out a flash drive. Security footage from the weekend of the fire. A neighbor's motion camera caught someone walking down the access path at 2:17 in the morning carrying a red gas can and wearing a hoodie with the HOA logo. You'll want to zoom in on the shoe's bright green soles. Same ones Marlene's son wore in last year's 4th of July photo, the one the HOA newsletter sent to every mailbox. Lena didn't blink. "You're saying they brought in family to torch your property?" "I'm saying this was personal." By the time I walked out of the courthouse, Lena had already called in a team to begin issuing warrants. I didn't hear from her again that day, but I didn't need to. The gears were moving now. Back in Glenridge, the vacuum Marlene left behind had thrown the remaining board members into panic mode. Some were trying to distance themselves. Others were scrambling to delete emails, shred files, or quietly resign. But they didn't know I'd already had a network of residents collecting documentation copies of newsletters, screenshots of threatening emails, even audio recordings from HOA meetings where decisions were made behind closed doors. One of the more vocal residents, Sheila McDowell, invited me to a gathering that evening at her place. Her backyard overlooked the lake, strung with soft lanterns and folding chairs. Maybe 20 people showed up, more than I expected. They weren't just angry, they were exhausted. Some had been fined for planting the wrong kind of rosebush. Others had been denied home repairs unless they agreed to processing fees. One man, a retired mechanic, had been threatened with foreclosure over a shed he'd built with city-approved permits. I didn't give a speech. I didn't need to. Instead, I handed out copies of the new Neighborhood Council Charter, simple, voluntary, and with full resident oversight. No forced dues, no power to levy liens. Just a group of neighbors making decisions together. Sheila read through it quietly, then looked up. "And this is legal, already filed with the City Planning Department," I said. "We're recognized as a civic committee, not a governing body. It's optional. We're not here to rule, we're here to listen." A man in the back raised his hand. "What happens to the board? They can resign," I said. "Or wait for the district attorney to knock." The next morning, the knock came. 3 board members were arrested before noon. The charges ranged from wire fraud to criminal conspiracy. One tried to claim he was just following instructions, but the financial trail painted a different story. He'd personally approved reimbursements for security patrols that never existed and withdrew cash from HOA accounts at a casino 2 counties over. The neighborhood exploded with gossip. Cars slowed as cruisers idled in driveways. The local news van parked outside the clubhouse for 2 hours, recording footage of officers loading boxes of files into their trunk. I stayed out of the spotlight. I had no interest in becoming a figurehead. I just wanted peace. But peace, it turned out, was going to take a little more effort. That Monday, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was measured, polite, and thoroughly corporate. Mr. Carter, I'm calling on behalf of Westbrook Residential Holdings. We're the parent company that originally developed Glenridge Lakes. I said nothing. We've been made aware of recent developments involving the HOA. We'd like to schedule a conversation regarding the land use agreements and the dissolution of the association. You mean the lease your company signed 18 years ago? That's correct. We'd like to revisit the terms. No need, I said. The termination is final. Your easement expired the moment your subsidiary violated the conditions. If you'd like to contest that, you're welcome to file. There was a pause. You're forcing our hand. I'm enforcing my rights. Another pause, then the call ended. By Wednesday, a thick envelope arrived via courier: legal threats, demands for arbitration, and a cease and desist order aimed at the newly formed neighborhood council. I read through it once, then handed it to my attorney. He chuckled. "They don't have a leg to stand on," he said. "The original lease has a self-voiding clause. You could turn this place into a nature preserve if you wanted to. I just want them out of our lives. Then we'll file a motion to dismiss and counterclaim for damages while we're at it." The court date was set for 3 weeks later. In the meantime, I kept my head down and continued rebuilding the dock, this time with reinforced pylons and a camera mounted to the lamp post. Residents came by to help, bringing drills, planks, even lemonade. It wasn't about the boat anymore. It was about reclaiming something that had been stolen slowly over years: dignity, independence, trust. The day of the hearing, I walked into the courthouse in a collared shirt and jeans. Westbrook's attorneys arrived in tailored suits, flanked by 2 PR reps who looked like they hadn't set foot in a real neighborhood in years. They tried to argue breach of contract, but the judge shut them down before they finished their second sentence. "The terms are clear," she said. "The lease was contingent on good faith governance. Your agents violated that. But the community no longer recognizes your authority. Case dismissed. We won damages. Not much, but enough to cover the legal fees. Enough to fund a new community center, managed by volunteers. Enough to plant new trees along the trail that led to the dock. That night, I stood on the rebuilt platform, the water still and glassy beneath my boots. The lanterns from Sheila's gathering swayed gently behind me, strung across the trees. Kids laughed somewhere in the distance. Someone was grilling again, but this time it didn't smell like danger. It smelled like freedom. Marlene's name never came up again. She took a plea deal. Fined, banned from holding civic office, and barred from participating in any HOA activity for 10 years. Her house went up for sale 2 weeks later. People still talk about that summer. About how one man stood up and reminded them they weren't powerless. That rules don't mean much if the people enforcing them are rotten to the core. That no one, not even someone with a clipboard and a title, has the right to burn down what you've built. And they remember how, when the smoke finally cleared, they weren't afraid anymore. The courtroom win didn't just put an end to Westbrook's legal bluff, it shifted the entire balance of power in Glenridge. Without the HOA's grip, and with the neighborhood council officially recognized by the city, neighbors began stepping up. Not because they were afraid of fines, but because they finally had a say. The change was quiet at first. Flower beds were suddenly less uniform but fuller, more vibrant. Kids chalked on sidewalks again, and no one got a warning letter in the mail for it. But while the neighborhood healed, I wasn't done. During the investigation, the assistant district attorney had flagged one item that hadn't made it to the courtroom yet. A payment buried deep in the HOA's archived financials. It had been listed as a consulting fee 2 years prior, but the bank routing number matched an account tied to a private contractor who had once lost a federal license after falsifying safety inspections on municipal buildings. The same man, apparently, had been hired by Marlene to evaluate security threats in Glenridge. She'd authorized the payment without board approval. That name stuck with me, Darrell Vetchner. I pulled a copy of the contractor's original background check. It was a laughable fake, shoddily forged credentials from a defunct university and a licensing agency that didn't even exist anymore. But what caught my attention was a line buried in one of the attachments. Client requested off-book surveillance setup. I called Lena Groves again. "This name come up in anything you've got?" I asked. There was a pause on the line. Then, hold on. 15 minutes later, she called back. "He's under investigation in another county, same MO. Bogus contracts, fake security audits, and a suspicious fire last summer that destroyed a resident's carport. No charges stuck because the HOA there claimed full responsibility and refused to cooperate." "What's the connection to Glenridge?" "I'm about to find out," she said. "If you've got anything else on this guy, now's the time." I did. While Marlene had been under house arrest awaiting sentencing, she'd left behind a storage unit 3 towns over. Apparently, she thought using her sister's name would keep it off the radar. It didn't. One of the residents who used to be on the architectural committee tipped me off. He remembered helping her move boxes labeled HOA archives into a red Chevy van a year earlier. I found the unit after running a property search on the sister's name. The lease had expired. I paid the overdue balance and opened it legally. Inside were 7 boxes filled with HOA records, most of them duplicates. But wedged between 2 binders was a flash drive. No label, no case, just a plain black stick. I brought it straight to Lena. She called me back the next morning. "There's a lot on this," she said, "and most of it. Well, let's just say you weren't the only resident targeted." The files were surveillance logs, dozens of them. Time-stamped entries, notes on people's routines, and even a few grainy stills taken from what looked like hidden trail cameras. One folder was labeled Priority Residents and my name was at the top. So were 6 others, all people who had challenged HOA decisions in the past. Lena's office moved fast. Within 72 hours, a search warrant was issued for Vetchner's property. When state police raided his warehouse outside Old Pine, they found more than surveillance notes. They found accelerants, blueprints of multiple Glenridge homes, and a laptop with a folder labeled HOA Ops. Inside that folder was a document titled Methods for Encouraged Compliance. It was a step-by-step playbook on how to use fear to keep residents in line. Fabricated citations, anonymous threats, even staged accidents meant to intimidate. The language was chillingly professional, cold, detached, and damning. Darryl Vetchner was arrested the following day. The charges: conspiracy to commit arson, unlawful surveillance, and multiple counts of criminal intimidation. But that wasn't the worst of it. Lena called again, voice tight. "There's video," she said. "From the night your boat burned, it's not just Vetchner. Marlene's son was there, and Marlene herself showed up 10 minutes later." I didn't react, I just waited. She didn't light the fire, but she watched, stood there until it was fully engulfed, then left. "We've got the footage. There's no walking away from it." That changed everything. The plea deal Marlene had agreed to was immediately revoked. She was rearrested, this time facing felony arson charges as an accessory. Her attorney tried to argue diminished responsibility, but the judge refused to entertain it. The footage was too clear, the planning too deliberate. At sentencing, I was asked if I wanted to deliver a statement. I didn't prepare anything. I just stood up and looked her in the eye. "You tried to make an example out of me," I said. "Tried to scare everyone into silence. You burned more than a boat. You burned people's trust, their sense of safety, their belief that fairness still mattered." She didn't meet my eyes. "You wanted control," I said. "Now you've lost everything." The judge gave her 12 years. Vetchner got 15 back in Glenridge. Something shifted. The new council held its first official election. No campaign posters, no corporate sponsors. Just neighbors, gathered under a tent at the park, voting with slips of paper and folding chairs. Sheila was elected chair. The retired mechanic became the treasurer. I declined to run for anything. Instead, I focused on rebuilding what I'd lost. The new boat, a sturdy center console with twin engines, arrived in early spring. I named her Second Wind. Not elegant, maybe, but honest. One evening, I took her out past the docks just as the sun was dropping behind the pines. The lake shimmered gold. A few kids waved from paddleboards. As I cut the engine and let the boat drift, I thought about how close it had all come to collapsing. How easily fear takes root when people stop believing they can fight back. But Glenridge had fought back, not with pitchforks, not with shouting, with facts, with patience. With people who refused to be bullied. And when the fire came, it didn't destroy them, it lit the way forward.